lost mine in the sand. Where will you stand?
Well, good morning, good afternoon, Hanok. Live from Modaine, and I just got one question to start with here. Did you guys see this thing coming and just not tell anybody? I mean, it's like, what happened in Syria? Really? What's going
Okay.
on, man?
The
Give us
irony is,
your analysis
okay,
here.
there's so much to cover. I'm going to
Yeah,
try to be succinct, which is very difficult. But I was going to mention the situation in Syria last week.
yeah.
But knowing the way things have played out in Syria in the past, I figured we had plenty of time to touch upon that.
Sure, got another
Uh,
week.
yeah, now I'd love to tell you that we saw this, and today I just saw that the head idiot of Iran blames, America and us. I wish the Biden administration had been so competent that they could have actually planned something.
Yeah, true.
But in Israel, we were totally taken by surprise. Mossad, IDF, military intelligence, no clue. Okay, so I'm going to kind of give a quick sketch. I urge people to go online and take a look at a map
Hmm.
of where Syria is compared to Lebanon,
Yeah,
compared to Turkey, compared to Iraq. Otherwise, nothing makes any sense. We were deeply concerned about Syria because for approximately 250 miles or so, Syria borders Lebanon.
yeah.
Lebanon slash Hezbollah has been getting an enormous amount of Iranian equipment via that way. So this was going to be a big problem for us. Now, no one expected the Assad dictatorship to be vaporized so quickly. Very important to understand, though, the coalition of rebel groups. See, when Americans tend to hear that a dictator was overthrown, they think freedom, they think
Mm.
democracy.
Yeah.
No, no, this is, and understand something. The enemy of my enemy can still be my enemy.
That's true.
That's
Yeah.
that's really important to
Yeah.
understand. You have a coalition of groups headed by a guy who has been a leader in Al Qaeda, has been a leader in Daesh. Daesh, by the way, it's only in America, it seems, that they call ISIS ISIS.
Mm.
In Europe and the Middle East, it's Daesh. That's the
Okay.
that's the Arabic equivalent. Anyway, he's been a leader in both groups. This guy, Al Julani, which by the way is not his real name, but harkens to the fact that he says his family had lived in the Golan Heights till they were chased out by Israel in 67.
Yeah.
60. So this guy has a $10 million bounty on his head from the US State Department.
Hmm.
He was a guest of the United States government in Guantanamo Bay for over 5 years. This
What a resume.
this is, I'm telling you. So, when people say to me, oh, this is, look, Assad is, okay. So we don't know what's going on. No one knows who's really going to be running Syria. Um, it has been miraculously a tremendous blow to Iran.
Hmm.
Iran had this axis, well, they called it axis of resistance. It was the axis of evil.
Yeah.
It was Iran, the rebels in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Hamas in the south. They had this what they call the Ring of Fire. Iran has been waging war against us through all of these groups. Astoundingly, the wow, within the last 2 days, somewhere between 320 and 350 airstrikes from the Israeli Air Force
Hmm.
and ground events, let's call it. And by the way, it's going to be a while until we actually know the full scope of what
Sure.
happened. But we have clearly taken out more than 80% of Syria's weapons capacity. We have sunk their navy. We have gotten rid of their stockpile of ballistic missiles, ship-to-ship missiles, surface-to-air missiles, their chemical weapons factories.
Yeah,
Now, again, Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. And
sure.
by the way, here's just a quick thing. Bashir Assad slaughtered close to 500,000 of his own people. Syrian refugees, the estimate that I read just yesterday was 12 million. He has never been indicted by the International Criminal Court, though. That's only for Israelis. Understand?
Yeah,
I mean,
well, they have, the International
insane.
Criminal Court has their a lot on their plate trying to come up with stuff about you guys. They don't have time for
Yeah.
for
No,
petty things like that.
no, nothing about real genocide.
Yeah,
No,
no.
no one cares. No Jews, no news. So skipping ahead, Israel, again, understand something. In 1974, the agreements ending the state of war of the Yom Kippur War had a buffer zone. We used to see it all the time on Connect. We'd go up to the Golan
Yeah,
Heights. We looked, there was the buffer zone. There were the UN idiots.
yeah.
That buffer zone now has all been taken over by Israel temporarily.
Hmm.
The Syrian side of Mount Hermon, the highest peak in the area, has been taken over by Israel. I am going to touch upon this in a few minutes because there are four main things. It's amazing. Every once in a while, at various points in my life, I get a tremendous insight into things. Not as often as I would like, admittedly, but it's and it's hard to tell now because it's usually preceded by insomnia and repeated headaches. But I've been suffering from insomnia for years, and headaches aren't all that different. What's different, of course, is that when something real comes out of it, which we're going to get to in a moment. But I have to say something very quickly about the UN. Now, neither you nor I have any sympathy for the UN.
No.
We've made that very clear for years. But a few days ago, UN, the UNIFIL troops were in danger. Rebels, unnamed rebels were approaching. Israel went to their aid and saved them. 2 days after that, the UN has condemned Israel for taking over the buffer zone. Now, my very first arrest, the very first time I was ever arrested was at the United Nations.
Oh,
And I have to say, really, I had that insight, and that was quite a while ago. So all this is swirling around. We don't know if Syria is going to be a united country. It will be dominated by Sunni jihadists. And I urge our listeners to read even just a little bit about Sunni Muslims and Shiite Muslims. You'll have an understanding a bit of what's going on. Syria is also more complicated because they have a significant Kurdish population. The Kurds are generally friendly to Israel, but they're up in the northeast,
okay.
way far from the
Yeah.
border with us, and they border Turkey. Turkey is a big player. The loon Erdogan, who runs their country, is very dangerous. So on the one hand, we can breathe a tremendous sigh of relief. Let's all do this together. Okay, so the relief is over. Iran
Yeah.
is pushed in the background. Turkey is here. Turkey recently, most people don't know this, broke off not only diplomatic relations with Israel, but all trade relations. Turkey was a big trading partner of ours. So big things are coming. So what's this big insight that Hanoch's got going?
Okay.
Well, first of all, before we get there, I want to share with you the mood in Israel. Now,
Mhm.
you'd think the mood would be improving because Hanukkah is coming and we have all manner of donuts that have been displayed. This is an incredibly dangerous time for those who have to fit into an airplane seat.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not personal. I know, Mike, I know you think I personalize everything. I think it's all about me, but okay. But the mood has been tremendously uplifted
Mm,
because we are coming closer and closer to real victory.
mm,
Now, of course, the big challenge that we've had is, would the Americans allow us to be victorious?
mhm,
It's starting to appear that way. But
mm.
okay, I've been going crazy with seeing some things that people are posting. And I have, it's interesting. I've spent much of the last 2 weeks working on my presentation for America.
Yeah.
94%, not 90%, but 94% of it is in the trash. And I've got this whole slew of other things, and it's not just Syria. There are 4 major concepts, or 3. Okay, let's. I should have written this out, but anyway,
Why start
and
now?
we have to talk about. Too late now. Let's wing it.
Yeah.
That's the first time we've ever done that, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay. Events of historical importance, biblical prophecy, miracles / the hand of Hashem. Let's start with those 3. We have to define them quickly because what's interesting is it all converges on what's going now. Events of historical importance. June 5th, 1967. Israel takes out the Egyptian and Syrian air forces on the ground. Essentially, the war is won. In a few hours. What has just happened in taking out the Syrian military threat, their jet fighters, their chemical weapons plants, the place that they were manufacturing missiles for Iran to give to Hezbollah. This is all gone.
Hmm.
An event of historical importance. Biblical prophecy. People will say, well, that's obvious. I see biblical prophecy very differently than most of the people that I'm friends with. Because to me, I think only a small amount of biblical prophecy is absolute, and the rest of it is like a decision tree. Hashem saying, if my people do A, this will happen. If my people do B, that will. But it's not an immediate cause and effect. It's not like, oops, I did something, I lit a fire on Shabbat. So boom, I'm zapped. It doesn't work that way. And we think of it on a national sense. Okay, so that was the second thing. Oh, miracles. The hand of Hashem. I can think of one off the top of my head just because it was the son of a friend of mine. My friend Baruch Ben Yosef, his son Malkiel, his unit was in Gaza. I've told this story before. It's amazing. His unit was in Gaza. They stopped. I think they were waiting for transportation. Everyone, they were traveling in one direction. So everyone is facing that way. Malkiel wanted to say the Mincha, the afternoon prayer. He turns around facing the Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount Jerusalem, and of course sees a terrorist coming out of a tunnel with an RPG. He takes him out, saves the whole squad. Clearly a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
Each and every one of those 3 can be separate in and of itself, tied in, or inextricably linked.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds like a definite maybe. What do I mean? What has caused me a near stroke in the last few days is the repeated posts from the prophet Yeshayahu, Isaiah, that Damascus is destroyed, it's a heap of ruins, and of course that then ties in with certain prophecies that people are relying upon with the coming of the Mashiach, the Messiah. Both within the Christian Messianic Hebrew roots tradition, as well as within the Jewish tradition. Different things that we're all pointing towards.
Yeah.
Okay, understand something, boys and girls. Damascus has not fallen. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So instead of, Assad is an Alawite, one of the minorities of Syria. So instead of an Alawite dictator, there are Sunni jihadists. Okay? Now, it's a big concern not only for the Kurdish population, but for the Druze, and 10% of Syria is Christian, by the way.
Mhm.
Okay. So, I have tried, generally in private communications, to explain to people that Damascus has not fallen. The response is, well, it will. Well, you know what? You can open up a Tanakh and point to anything and say this is going to happen. We have to deal in the world as it is today. We have an expression in Hebrew, Ein somchim ala nes, don't depend upon miracles. We could have all gotten together, as probably the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox population would have wanted, and all prayed that Hashem protect us from the new jihadists running Syria. Or we could have done what we did and taken out their capacity to hurt us. It's estimated that, now understand this, Syria was built up over decades at the cost of billions of dollars from Iran and Russia.
Mhm.
Now, that was the thing that was amazing. Why was it that Assad was so vulnerable? Because we had taken out Hezbollah. Hezbollah was used by Iran to support Assad and kill Syrians. Hezbollah wasn't available. Russia's busy in Ukraine. And we, Israelis, took out all of Iran's air defenses. Oops. So, but to say this is an act of fulfillment of biblical prophecy is overstating things. I don't think you can describe an event as fulfillment of prophecy until after the fact, when you can look back and see what it's like when all the dust is settled.
I would agree with you there. Yeah.
I have yet to find anything in all of the prophecies of all of Nach, of all of the part of the Tanakh that has to do with prophecies. I have never found anything that I could correlate with the June 1967 Six-Day War. I haven't found anything.
Mhm. I mean,
But
we can
that
go
was
back to
really
we can go back to 19
miraculous.
yeah, we can go back to 1948 and we can see,
Right.
can a nation be born in a day?
Yeah.
You know, there's probably a lot of prophecy that one of these days we're going to look back and go, wow, okay, I didn't see that.
Yeah. Right.
To me, that verse, and I have this verse underlined in Isaiah 17, and I urge people to go back and read not only the one verse, but the other verses around it to get a little bit more of a context for that. To me, I see that yes, one day Damascus will be leveled. In fact, it goes on to say it's not even going to be inhabited. There won't even be sheep there or goats that were going to be in that area. But what this, to me, what this says is, I look at a level of this with Assad leaving and the bombing and all that's going on, and it's like, okay, Hashem is like, okay, guys, just in case you have missed the fact that I'm around, I want to give you another clue. You need to be paying attention to what's going on in the world today, because as a good friend of ours up in the north says, that he is revealing himself, and the vast majority of the world is not seeing it.
No, they're not. The idea that in approximately 14 months, it's been a little over 14 months, we were facing a very grim situation, a frighteningly powerful Hezbollah, an unknowingly powerful Iran, Syria, Hamas. Now, and again, when I mention Hamas, I want, Hamas is largely defeated, not totally,
Mm-hmm.
but Hamas, one of Hamas's main supporters in the world is Turkey.
Yeah.
Now, having Turkey bordering Syria is incredibly problematic and incredibly dangerous. So, how my government winds up navigating things, and what's amazing is all of these events going on, the tremendous success that we've had against the Syrian military.
Hmm.
That's not even the top three stories in the
No,
Israeli news.
no.
It's all focused on Netanyahu's trial. It's really bizarre. It's
You know,
really, we're living in extraordinarily bizarre times.
you mentioned, for many people, well, the war in Gaza is over with, until I checked the news the other day and saw that three more of the soldiers from Givati Shaked unit had died. And
Yeah.
the
No,
reason,
no. And again, what I said was Hamas is largely defeated.
yeah.
The war is not over.
Oh
The war
no,
is not
no.
over.
But see, it's, well, we've kind of moved. This is the attitude I see as a whole. Well, we've moved on from Gaza. This is not specifically to Israel. This is the world situation. Other people,
Absolutely.
well, we've moved on. They've done all these things, but now, once again, three more soldiers that I was in a room with in February have been killed. The reason being for that is they actually were not going by the operating procedures of the day, and they were
Right.
moving during the daytime.
Yeah.
Hello, this has been my prayer for the IDF for quite some time, is that in this time that they would not be overconfident in what they're doing. And I don't know what why these guys were doing this, but this is a war in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, that is still going on. To think that there's anybody in that area, including Jordan and Egypt, that are like, but wanting to be buddy buddy with Israel, is right between naive and stupid.
It's and in fact, the situation with Jordan, based on what's just happened in Syria, is even more precarious.
Yeah,
And Iran was trying to get weapons through Jordan to terrorists in Yosh, Judea and Samaria. So this is the time, actually, as you said, most of the people that we know, or people in general in the world, have shifted their interests. It's kind of like, oh, is that still going on? The reality is this is the time for us to sort of gird our loins and be prepared for the next step.
yeah.
Like
Uh,
I was reading something the other day, and it's funny because I'm wearing the shirt, Freedom for the Temple Mount. The It all started ostensibly over the Temple Mount,
hmm.
and where it or when it will end is going to be around that too. And this is why, and we've got some interesting things planned coming up. Uh, you know, with High on the Har. Even, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the shirts that we have, with the big temple logo, and it says in Hebrew, and actually there's in English too, Bimheira v'yameinu, speedily in our days. Did I mention this? We have a
You
line
did. I didn't
coming
see it.
out
Hear
with that saying in Arabic.
it.
And that's for the Waqf, the Islamic Council that, Jordan has sent. Yeah, we've got, another thing, but I'll tell you about that. Do you realize I'm going to be hanging out with you in a little more than 4 weeks?
Yeah, I saw that the other day. I looked at the calendar and went, "Uh-oh, wow! We better I better warn Kaya that you might be over for dinner or something." So so she can get warned. Hey, I want to bring up something else. Unless you had anything else you want
I've got a tons of things,
to?
but
Okay,
but stop me because I'll just keep rolling.
okay. I want to bring up something else. And I'm going to be talking probably to Barry Phillips on our program at some point about this in the future. In the United States, there is a push I see, and maybe this is worldwide. I can just speak from my influence here. There's a push by the Catholic Church, and this was stated by the Pope many years ago, that it was time for those who had split off from the Catholic Church to come back. And I got I saw a, yeah, I know. I saw a meme the other day. Dove actually put this out. And if you want to understand the root of Catholicism, there was a picture taken of the Pope in a wheelchair in Bethlehem with a manger scene, and the little, in their terminology, the little baby Jesus was laying in a manger, which was the, how do you pronounce that head covering for the Palestinians?
Kafia,
The
the
kafia.
Arabs.
The
Yeah.
kafia. They had him in that.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean,
I actually already have that as a slide for my upcoming
oh, good. Okay.
presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. So, if anybody wants to understand what is going on, the heart of the Catholic Church is anti-Semitism. The heart of the Catholic Church is Jew hatred. And so if I sound a little bit like I'm not buying this religious air of commercialism that the Catholic Church is now promoting, um, there's a reason for that. Because as you said a few weeks ago, in checking boxes, you know, you said, don't just make Israel the only box you check. Well, sorry, Hanok, you're talking to somebody that the only box I check is Israel. Okay, that is my box, pretty much. So, all right.
Um, there are those people who think, by the way, that our military leadership, when they consider a move like the buffer zone, this is not a greater Israel move.
No.
This is not like, well, the eventual, Nile to the Euphrates. Get that out of your head, peeps. Get that out of your head. This is something that Hashem will eventually, in his
Mhm.
time, make possible. But the idea, I actually had someone, first of all, their facts were all messed up, but they were explaining to someone, this is, of course, in writing, that Israel had seized part of northern Egypt. They were referring to the Sinai, okay, which has never been part of Egypt. Okay, listen, but this is the best part. But returned it because it wasn't included in the promised biblical borders. Now,
Right.
first of all, it shows that this individual is a giant idiot because the biblical borders, the promised borders, the greater Israel borders, is the Nile. The Sinai is north of the Nile. But the idea that, the government of Israel would sit and say, open up a time. No, it's like, no, we can't take that buffer zone. Bashan in the Golan is actually shorter of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, just one quick thought on what you said in
Right.
terms of checking off the box. I was referring to American politics.
Yeah, I know.
And again, here's a really important thing. America's got a chance, Americans have a chance to retake their country. To me, it's going to be fascinating, not what Trump does in the next 4 years, but what do Americans do in the next 4 years? Is it going to be a blip on the radar,
Yep.
or is it going to be business as usual?
Yeah.
By the way, I don't want to talk about American politics, but I do think Trump's comment to Justin Trudeau, the idiotic Prime Minister of Canada, and then his sub that was and it was, by the way, like, because they've got all these trade barriers
Yeah.
to America, and Trump saying, that's got to come down, and like, well, maybe, Canada should be the 51st state and you could be the governor. So the other day, after that, like 2 days later, Trump tweets that he had a good dinner with the governor of the
Yeah.
great state of Canada. It was wonderful, wonderful,
Yeah.
tremendous entertainment.
Yeah, he can kind of push some things, and it is going to be interesting to watch. Back to your greater borders of Israel, Hanok.
Yeah.
I think that before Israel starts looking at greater borders, they need to take control of everything within the current borders and get
I
the
mean,
enemies out, which is
again, yeah,
yeah,
Judea and Samaria
yeah,
are not part of the state of Israel in the same way that Tel Aviv and Haifa or even Modi'in are.
yeah.
By the way, the other day, last week, for the very first time, I stood in the renovated Beit Knesset synagogue of the Maccabees here in Modi'in.
Wow.
Um, so you're picturing Yehuda, Judah, and his brothers, kind of like running around, wreaking havoc. So it's pretty
Mm,
freaky. But much to talk about with Hanukkah, but that's
got it.
still a few days away.
There you go. All right. Well, hey, I have to run because I have Grandpa Sir duties coming up today. So,
Okay.
that even takes precedence over Hanok.
Sure enough, I
Imagine
get it.
that. All right, man. Take
Yeah.
care. Talk to
See
you
ya.
soon.
Take care.